This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardenis, to use this as an educational material. Socrates was a Greek philosopher from Athens, who is credited as the founder of Western philosophy, and among the first moral philosophers of ethical tradition of thoughts. The perception of the self, according to Socrates, explains the nature of man and the rationale on which man thinks. Socrates believed that man is a product of his thoughts. Socrates questioned the way we attach importance to what people say without understanding the principle of individual thinking. Socrates stressed the importance of happiness, self-achievement, and fulfilling goals without hurting yourself or others. A person who cannot find inner happiness or gain value is living a life that is not worth living. Therefore, one should gain the value of life and inner happiness through studying and examine the life, the world around, and eternal world of him. In such a way, the life become more purposeful and fruitful. Otherwise, the life would be pointless and useless. Socrates said, "Know yourself, for the unexamined life is not worth living." I really believe in what he said. Socrates further claimed that as humans beings must know ourselves to be able in accordance with who we are. I understand the point that Socrates claimed that we should and know ourselves to be our life is worth living. Another philosopher from the Greek triumvirate, Plato, was a philosopher in classical Greece and the founder of the academy in Athens, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. He is widely considered as the most pivotal figure in the development of philosophy, especially in Western tradition. He is the student of Socrates. Plato believed that self is synonymous with soul. Plato's philosophy of self can be explained as a process of self-knowledge and purification of the soul. The self consists of three parts: reason, spirit or passion, and physical appetite. Reason is the divine essence that enables us to think deeply, make wise choices, and achieve a true understanding of eternal truths. The spirit or passion includes a basic emotions such as love, anger, ambition, aggressiveness, and empathy. The physical appetite includes our basic biological needs such as hunger, thirst, and sexual desire. These three elements of ourselves are in a dynamic relationship with one another, sometimes in conflict. When conflict occurs, Plato believes that it is the responsibility of our reason to sort things out and exert control, restoring a harmonious relationship among the three elements of ourselves. Plato believes that genuine happiness can only be achieved by people who consistently make sure that their reason is in control of their spirits and appetites.
Aristotle was founded the field of formal logic, made a groundbreaking contribution to all areas of philosophy and science, and identified and examined the connection between the numerous scientific disciplines. In addition to being philosopher, Aristotle was teacher who established the Lyceum in Athens. According to his metaphysics, there must be distinct, immutable entity that serves as the foundation for all other creatures. In his ethics, he contended that the only way to acquire eudaimonia, a state of bliss contentment that he views as the highest possible human existence, is through becoming wonderful. Aristotle has created the basis and ideal of today's scientific knowledge, such as the classification of organisms and object creation of a logic system, established many fields of scientists, and creation of philosophy system.
Saint Augustine Christian bishop and a theologian. Saint Augustine, also called Saint Augustine of Hippo. Original Latin name Aurelius Augustinus. Born November 13, 353. Tagaste, Numedia, now Sook Haaras, Algeria. Died August 28, 430. Hippo Regius. Now Annaba, Algeria. Feast day August 28. Bishop of Hippo from 396 to 430. One of the Latin father of the church and perhaps the most significant Christian thinker after St. Paul Augustus' adoption of classical true to Christian teaching created to a theological system of a great power and lasting influence. His numerous written works, the most important of which are Confession, c. 40, and The City of God, c. 13:426, shape and practice of biblical exegesis and help lay the foundation of much medieval and modern Christian true in Roman Catholicism. He is formally recognized as a doctor of the Church. What is St. Augustine best known for? More than 5 million words of St. Augustine's writings survive, ranging from sermons to theological treatises. Of these two have had particularly lasting influence: The City of God, and Confessions. The former is a philosophical defense of Christianity that outlines a new way to understand human society, and the latter is largely a spiritual self-examination. How did St. Augustine impact the world? St. Augustine is perhaps the most significant Christian thinker after St. Paul. He adapted classical to Christian teaching and created a powerful theological system of lasting influence. He also shaped the practice of biblical exegesis and helped lay the foundation for much of medieval and modern Christian thought. Anthony de Mello, also known as Tony de Mello, born September 4, 1931, died June 2, 1987, in New York. Was an Indian Jesuit priest and psychotherapy, a spiritual teacher, writer, and a public speaker. De Mello wrote several books on spirituality and hosted numerous spiritual retreats and conferences. He continues to be known for his storytelling, which drew from the various mystical traditions of both East and West, and for introducing many people in the West to mindfulness-based practice. He is sometimes called awareness prayer.
Maurice Merleau-Ponty believed that the physical body to be an important part of what makes up the subjective self. I'm going to explain what he meant by subjectivity. Also, we're going to understand rationalism and empiricism. So first, what is subjectivity or subject? For our purposes, we'll think of a subject as something that has a being. A subject is a real thing that can take real action and cause real effects. In short, it exists. Keeping this in mind, Maurice Merleau-Ponty believed the physical body to be an important part of what makes up the subjective self. Now let's talk about rationalism. When speaking of self or being, rationalism asserts that reason and mental perception, rather than physical senses and experience, are the basis of knowledge and self. In other words, our rational thinking minds are where it's all at. For example, are you mentally here or just physically? Next is empiricism. Standing in contrast to rationalism is empiricism. Empiricism is the belief that our physical senses are the only source of knowledge. If the source of knowledge can't be seen, touched, heard, tasted, etc., can't be trusted, or in other words, it can't be empirically studied, it's a no-go. Under these parameters, the idea of some mystical mind independently perceiving and giving us our sense of self comes under some serious scrutiny. An empiricist may argue with our physical body and not some mystical mind makes up our sense of self, while the rationalist would say, I think, therefore I am. An empiricist would say, I sense, therefore I am.
Foucault's. The entire philosophy is based on the assumption that human knowledge and existence are profoundly historical. He argues that what is most human about in his history. He discusses the notions of history, change, and historical method at some length at various points in his career. The theory of power Foucault challenges the idea that power is wielded by people or groups by way of episodic or sovereign acts of domination or coercion, seeing it instead as depressed and pervasive. Care of the self constitutes a lifelong practice of self-formation and ethical exercises as a means of creating what Foucault calls an art of life. It is a way of examining freeing oneself not by socially constructed norms and standards, but according to one's own ethical code. Foucault saw an alternative in Hellenistic model of practices of the self, which inspired him to sketch an ethics of taking care of oneself as a practice of freedom. Taking care of the self always aims of the well-being of others, which implies that power relations should be managed in a non-authoritarian manner.
Homi was empiricist, meaning he believed cause and effect are discoverable not by a reason but by experience. He goes on to say that even if the perspective of the past, humanity cannot negate the future event because thoughts of the past are limited compared to the possibilities for the future. On the other hand, the fundamental idea of Kant's critical philosophy is a human autonomy. He argues that a human understanding is a source of a general laws of nature that structure all our experience, and that human reason gives itself the moral law, which is our basis for belief in God, freedom, and immortality. The relation of these two philosophers is whom locates the foundation of morality in a human nature, primarily in our emotional response to the behavior of our fellow human beings. By contrast, Kant locates the foundation of morality in a rational nature that we share with all possible finite rational beings. How did Hume affect Kant? Kant accepts with Hume that there is no source experience for the claim that particular laws of nature are necessarily true. How does Kant disapprove Hume? Scientist Kant was able to disapprove Hume's theory that cause and effect are merely coincidental. Hume's theories relied solely on perception and sensation, failing to acknowledge that there must be some sort of connection between this perception. What is self according to Kant and Hume? Hume's problem, according to Kant, was that he looked for himself in a wrong place, contrary to what Hume assumed. The self is not an object of consciousness, one of the contexts of the mind. Instead, the self in the transcendental activities synthesize the context of consciousness into an intelligible whole.
René Descartes was a French philosopher, scientist, and a mathematician widely considered a seminal figure in the emergence of modern philosophy and science. He is the father of modern philosophy. Descartes had various of considering the self. He argues that the self can be correctly considered as either a mind or a human being, and that the self's properties vary accordingly. For example, the self is simple considered as a mind, whereas the self is composite considered as a human being. He also argued that the theory of innate knowledge, and that all humans were born with knowledge through the higher power of God, and it was this theory that was combated by philosopher John Locke, an empiricist. Empirism holds that all knowledge is acquired through experience. John Locke was an English philosopher and physician widely regarded as one of the most influential of Enlightenment thinkers and commonly known as the father of liberalism. He holds that a personal identity is a matter of psychological continuity. He considered personal identity or the self to be founded on consciousness and not on the substance of either the soul or the body. For Locke, the essence of the self is its conscious awareness of itself as a thinking, reasoning, reflecting identity.
Paul Churchland. Churchland is famous for championing the thesis that are everyday common sense. Folk psychology, which seeks to explain human behavior in terms of the beliefs and desires of agents, is actually a deeply flawed theory that must be eliminated in favor of a mature cognitive neuroscience. So, folk psychology is also referencing behavior in the brain. Churchland, claim, Churchland claims that the idea of folk psychology is insufficient. He states how it is remarkable that we can explain and predict the behavior of others in terms of desire, beliefs, fear perception, and intentions, also known as professional attitude. So the best known for Paul M. Churchland is Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. He is author of The Engine of Reasons, that seat of the soul, matters, and consciousness.
The postmodern self consists solely of fragmented situational images that result in an emotional flatness or deepness. Postmodernism relies on concrete experience over abstract principles, knowing always that one outcomes of one's own experience will necessarily be fallible and relative, rather than certain and universal. So, what is self? The concept of the self generally refers to the personal identity, core philosophies, self-consciousness, and overall consequences that define one's nature and how one connects to the world. Many theories and beliefs exist about the self, that there has never been a universal consensus of its meaning or what it represents. Viewing on the self differ depending on where is in the world. Additionally, through the Eastern concept of the self are based on many of the same principles, individual religions and belief systems that each have their own unique explanation of the self. Hinduism and Buddhism are two prominent Eastern religions that have different beliefs about the human self. Overall, Eastern philosophy views the self as an illusion. Eastern religions believe that we are all interconnected and part of a greater universal whole.